welcome to another episode of Resisting Pretense. We're having honest conversations about a life of faith in modern culture. And very thankful to have Sterling and Jade Bloomfield here with us.
Hello, hello.
And
hello.
Somewhat thankful to have Scott along with us along the way. Oh, hi, Scott.
You're somewhat welcome.
Also very thankful for our unofficial sponsor, Diet Coke, that will keep me awake through the entire episode. And let's see what else. I think that's it for.
Definitely not sponsored by Starbucks.
We're not sponsored. Not unofficially sponsored by
Not
Starbucks.
even unofficially.
We did get free cups, which is why we're using.
Yeah, I was going to say they're probably discontinued cups. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, have you some Starbucks workers that bring leftovers to us every once in a while?
Nice.
Have you ever read Starbucks backwards? It's scub rats.
Scub rats?
Mm-hmm.
Is that significant?
Nope. But it's funny.
Right. My family.
They're boomers. They wouldn't understand.
I'm like,
No,
wait a
boomers.
minute. I think I missed something here.
My family has a whole thing about backwards names. So
okay.
like, all our email addresses are like mine is mott@scrub.net. So
that's
it's
awesome.
Tom Burke's backwards. And Stacy's favorite backwards name is Arabarab Deleeful Butts.
What
Which
is
is
that?
Barbara Stubblefield.
That is hilarious.
So,
All comments made on this podcast are not necessarily the.
We are we're in a series right now talking. We haven't officially named the series. Hopefully, we'll have a name for the series before it comes out. But we did the OK Boomer series talking about boomer perspectives on the church, and I don't know. There's no like millennial phrase like "okay, boomer."
No.
So I don't know. This is the
Apparently
Shut up,
we're
what?
stuck wearing ankle socks, so you can call it ankle socks or something. I don't know. We get roasted for
the
ankle socks.
socks perspective. All right. So you guys are what 30? What is that?
32.
32.
I'm older than she is. So.
By 9 months.
That you have.
Thank you.
Does that mean she'll be taking care of you in your old age? Is that the idea?
That's a red flag. We got to think that one over.
Dang.
You get to choose his nursing home.
Yeah.
That's what my kids say.
Oh, that's so funny. Never thought about that.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, particularly like spiritually, where you're coming from, and then we'll launch into some questions about your perspective on the church.
You go ahead.
Okay.
You start it.
All right. So
You're older than me.
Grew up in church. I used to joke and say I was born on the second row. But I grew up in church. Parents were pastors. Their parents were pastors. I think their parents were pastors.
Doomed.
Yeah. So a lot of pastors there. And so been in church my whole life, seen it all, been around it all. So that's kind of my background as far as, growing up in the church and being involved with that. And so I've kind of seen my own ideas of how church has gone, and the things that I've liked, I like, and the things I don't like. And I think we can all agree on that. And seen, the good, the bad, the ugly in that world. And I think it's honestly, it's allowed me to be really well-rounded as far as, not getting upset about things that I see. If something's not perfect, I don't really care anymore. I just want to experience Jesus at this point,
I like that.
So what about you?
I did not grow up in the church at all. My stepdad was in the military. We moved around a lot. I took myself, so we lived on the military base. We lived like down the street from the church. I would take myself to church because I was bored as an 8-year-old.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I would take myself to Sunday school just to have something to do on Sundays. And when I was 12, I gave my heart to Jesus. A lady from India who did missions came and talked about it, and it overwhelmed me. So I gave my heart to Jesus that night. And then we got married at 23, but we met in high school when we were 15. And so I had been going to church with him since 15. And then we became worship pastors for like almost a decade, right? So yeah, I've seen the not church world and the church world for half my life, for both of them. So
I'm excited. This is going to be a great conversation. So, well, let's dig in with the negative side first, maybe, and we'll cover negatives and positives. But where have you seen the church kind of fall short for you or your generation, or just in general? But where have you seen the church fall short that you feel like warrants conversation?
One of the biggest things that I've seen, and I've had other conversations with people. I just had coffee with a girl like a couple weeks ago. She used to be super involved in church. She's not going to church at all now. But we were talking about how a lot of the modern day church really wants you to look good on paper, which means be presentable. It's kind of like when your parents tell you to dress nice and wash your hands because we're going out to a special dinner. Mm-hmm. Be presentable. But we don't really care where you're at internally while you're presenting yourself to the world.
As long as you're wearing the Hillsong boots, you're cool.
Yes.
But other than that, you're out of the loop.
Boots. Yes. Yeah. And
sorry.
No, it's true. When
you're still on order.
Darn.
Darn.
But when you're younger, and at least for me, like I didn't grow up in church, so I just thought that that's what it was, and it was sufficient for some time. But as you get older and life gets a little deeper and more responsibilities end up on your plate, you're like, something's lacking here. I need some heart.
Yeah.
Here. That's my perspective, at least.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of I think for me, you get the boomers. What's after boomers? What was before boomers?
Well, before boomers was builders, and then after boomers was
Gen
X.
Are there any more boomers?
He's still alive.
The builders.
Oh,
I don't know. I don't know if my mom. So my mom will be 94 next month. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, but I think she still falls. She's like on the front end of the boomer generation.
All right. So I'll say
no. She's clearly Buster.
Is it Builder or Buster?
Not Buster.
Of the Builder.
No, the Builder generation. She's a Builder generation.
Yeah, because she would have been World War II.
Okay,
yeah, so that's
World
correct. Yeah, so she would be of the Builder generation.
Yeah. So do you know those Builder generation people in the church that are like the very elderly Builder people? When those people come up to you at church and remind you of the rules, or remind you of like oh, you wore that today, or oh,
I can't handle the joke. What is it? Oh, I bet you guys have told it too. It's about the holes in the jeans. It's like, I can get you a new pair. I know where you can buy jeans that don't have holes. And I'm
like, no, mine's more like, you really paid money for those?
You guys hate the whole jeans. I don't understand it.
I don't hate the whole jeans. I just don't understand
Tom's
paying
wearing
money.
Them.
Yes. Good job, Tom.
I don't understand paying money for them.
That's hilarious.
So
they're rustic. Okay, it's a fashion statement.
Anyways,
in other words, the millennials like the boomer retro clothes, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. You want to wear the boomers' clothes. You just don't want to be criticized.
Exactly. Right. We want to look like we've done the hard work that you actually did.
That you did yourselves. That's great. I love it.
But like so many times, in church, you get quickly reminded of, even online, oh, what an interesting thing you did. Oh, do you think Jesus would approve of that? Do you think, your parents would approve of that? And there's a lot of that where it's like over the top for every little thing. So stay in line no matter what.
And
you don't have social media, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Is that why?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I feel like, and I can even see that too with all the different types of issues that go on. There's a lot of bullying from the church. And it's not, I understand that we have a belief and we have a perspective, but I don't think Jesus ever bullied somebody into submission.
And I guess I'm like you. And I don't know if that's just because I've been with our church for so long. But even under Pastor Sam, it was always come as you are.
That's cool.
It was never at least I never felt like there was an expectation.
And I wouldn't say we've experienced that at Stone Ridge, but definitely online and in other atmospheres. Yeah, for sure.
And I can see that. I mean, even filling the pulpit for other churches, people would come up and make snarky comments. And I'm like, have a good day.
Yeah.
I preached at another church a little while ago, and got an email from someone wanting to correct my sermon. And it wasn't that they disagreed with what I said, but they just didn't. There was another side of it. And I'm like, well, yeah, you can't preach the whole Bible in every like.
Right.
I was covering a topic, and they're like, well, you didn't talk about this. I'm like, because
that wasn't the point.
That wasn't the point.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah.
And then I think you see like a section of that people that want the gospel to be said in a certain way. Like, I don't like that church because they don't portray the gospel the right way. And the right way is either the rules, or we're not hitting the Holy Spirit enough, or we're not doing enough falling out in the Spirit, or we're not doing enough, prophesying or speaking in tongues. And because of that, I don't like that church or what. And like our generation's like, hey, can somebody just talk about the pain I'm going through?
Yeah. Can we just be authentic?
Could we just be like
I think
authentic and just talk
Yeah.
about like how can God reach me here today and what I'm facing?
Like when church starts to feel like you can't, it shouldn't feel like a career. It should feel like home, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to work, you kind of have to dust it off and hold your chin up and suck it up, get through the day. But church should be where you're able to kick your boots off and shed a tear and talk and laugh and,
I like that.
So let me ask this question, because it just struck me. Because I agree with you. I think that the boomer generation can be critical. At least that's kind of what I'm hearing. Do you think that the millennial generation is critical in a different way, or do you think they're just not critical? Do you think that it's just shifted in a different way in the church?
I think we've all been brainwashed into being political. In our generation, and I can't stand it. I can't stand it. For God, like I have strong political beliefs, but when it comes to me loving somebody, that's not even in my mind. That I see that everywhere now, and it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm tired of it.
Yeah,
and it's worse. I like we're in the middle of an election year, and
it's always
worse.
heightened. Yeah.
So, how would you describe like your language for what's the mission of the church?
Good question.
The church broadly,
yeah,
I think the church broadly should be focused on bringing people like the truth of the gospel without trying to force people into submission of the gospel. And correct,
more of an invitation
than a demand.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's also like the yin and yang of. That doesn't mean we're just going to be like anything goes, love Jesus, because I've seen that too, and I don't think that works perfectly either. To just be like open-armed to everything ends up in a lot of mess just as much as being like all rules and all regulations. And I think there's like, you can't be 100% hot and you can't be 100% cold. You've got to find that middle ground. And I think that a healthy church that has the proper mission has the mission of saying, hey, God can bring structure into your life. God can bring peace into your life. And God has clearly written out how we can do that. So let's go through that journey together. And I think if that message gets driven across through everything that gets done, then anyone's able to receive from that. It's when we say we're going to cast out this group of people or cast out this group of this style of thinking because the Bible demands it. So then, therefore, you either can come here and do this or you cannot. We're either going to kick you out or we're going to force you in. And like that's where that rigidness, I think, starts to turn people off, and they see the rules and like, oh, I don't fit in.
What about you, Jade? How would you describe like your concept of the mission of the church?
I can't really come up with a perfect phrase, but I can come up with the idea
Sure.
of what I'm trying to say. For me, I go back to every situation in my life. they hid. They were afraid. Adam and Eve hid.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I've screwed up, you hide. You keep it, right? You keep it all internal. And there's so much darkness in the world, period. Whether it was 100 years ago or today, it's there. And it's just not gone away, right? And I think as a church, admitting that everyone has a shadow and they need Jesus to enter that. And as being the church, it's our job to say, God sees it. He sees you. And that's not in a, he sees you. It's in a, yes, you failed and he sees it. But his hand is still there for you. And I think having that spirit as a church is like is the whole point.
So where do you see the church doing that well? Are there some ways that you're like, oh, I love it when I see churches or...
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know what? And I'm not trying to, I don't know what the word is, but I saw you do that at, I won't mention when because I don't want to call anybody out, but I saw you do that at an event last year. There was clearly, and this is like a hot topic in our day and age, but there was a gay couple sitting on one of the rows at an event. And of all the people you could ask questions to, I watched you walk up and ask them a question. And I was like, heck yeah. Like that's it. To me, that was it. That's the point. That's the point. That's love in and of itself. That's displayed love. That's what Jesus would have done, in my opinion. And I know that's a hot topic, and that'll rouse a few feathers, but that's my opinion.
Yeah. So. I don't know if it was last week or a few weeks ago, but I think it was Scott who did a message on
communication.
Yeah. And it was the most applicable message I'd heard in church in like 20 years. It was like, wow, where has that been? Mm-hmm. And I was like, dang, they've nailed it today. I'm like, wow. Not to just, fill you with pride.
No, I'm humbled, honestly. Okay, Lord, you can take me home now.
But
no, I heard a lot of good things. Like people were talking to me like, "Oh wow, Scott just nailed it."
Yeah,
yeah, and you know what it was? It wasn't just Scott giving his opinion, but it was like, here is a thread in the Bible, and it's not just one verse in the Bible that says like, like you get a lot of messages that are all based around like one little simple idea in the Bible, and there'll be 1,000 messages on that. But then there'll be these big threads through the Bible that are like when something's repeated, it's important because there's no underline in the Bible. There's no bold or italics. There's just highlight. The ability to repeat, right? And so as the more something's repeated in the Bible, the more important it is. And to be able to say, look, here it says this, here it says that, here it says this, here it says that. Do you see the thread? God's obviously wanting us to control our tongue. God's obviously wanting us to speak to each other in love. God's wanting us, and like for people listening to that and to be able to say like, oh man, yeah, I was a real jerk to my family today. Or I was just rude to the guy at the gas station because I just stubbed my toe and I was mad. And I was just rude to some stranger for no reason. And like that little reminder of like, hey, guard your tongue was like, oh man, there's so many people I wish could hear that message today, including me.
That's funny.
A guy come up and say, that singed me. Sorry. Singed.
Wow,
I got singed. I got singed by that.
That's hilarious.
But I mean, really well-crafted messages, I think, is one of the greatest ways that the church could be doing it right. Yeah, and then not focused on being like the perfect church with the perfect presentation and the perfect service and the perfect lights and the perfect everything. Because like, yeah, that's nice, but that's not the substance. That's not why people are coming.
I think too, kind of piggybacking on what you're saying, it's so easy. I think, and I've seen this everywhere. You see it a lot online too, but it's so easy with everything going on in the world for churches to get caught up in like, let's just preach Revelation. Let's just talk politics. Let's just, because it's a sense of urgency. We need to solve it. We need to fix. And it's like, okay, even if Jesus was coming back today and all the bombs started dropping and it was the end, I would still like to know how to be kind to my neighbor because that's ultimately what's going to matter, even in that moment. And I think the church can lose grasp of that.
I can't tell you how many times I have that like anytime we've ever opened like a input, like, hey, what do you guys want to hear about? Always like the most frequent thing that comes up, Revelation. We want to hear about the end. We want to hear about the end times. We want to hear about Revelation. And I have to control my reaction.
Yeah.
Because I like my head's where you're at, where you just said that the end has very little to do with like how it ends, when it ends. All of that has very little to do with my day-to-day life.
Right.
My day-to-day life is how do I love my neighbor that's my neighborhood neighbor, my coworker,
right,
my kids, my wife, how do I be salt and light to the people in my immediate sphere?
Right.
And I don't know, I have a bias about Revelation. I don't think Revelation was written primarily to an audience that was comfortable and curious.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It was written to Christians that were hiding in catacombs.
They weren't drinking their Starbucks and Diet Coke at the podcast table.
That's right. Mm-hmm. It was people under heavy persecution, people that were being imprisoned and thrown into coliseums, and they desperately needed to know it ends well.
Right. Justly. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a lifeline of hope for them. But most of the American Christians that I hear that want to hear about Revelation, it's more intellectual curiosity. It's more like, I want to know the secret code.
Okay.
Like I want the insider knowledge to how it ends, but it's not going to change what they do today.
And piggybacking on that, I find that most Americans think the Revelation story is about what's going on in our country. Like, I'm sorry, just because your president didn't get elected or did get elected does not mean that the rest of the world, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
We have a very biased, yes, we do. We think sometimes that we are the center of all of it.
We are a prideful country.
We are.
Yeah. We're like a bunch of 4-year-olds.
But there's been children dying and crazy wars going on for generations in other countries, and we stub our toe and we're like, oh, it's time.
Yep. I think there's two different mentalities. The one mentality, which I see a lot of the boomer generation kind of living on, is this, let's find out when Christ is returning, and let's find out when it all ends, because I don't like my life right now. So I would much rather focus on what's coming rather than live right now. And I've heard a guy talk one time about how a lot of the things written in the Bible, including Revelation, but the themes in the Bible have nothing more so about bringing heaven to your life today.
Yeah.
How can I make my environment heaven?
As it is in heaven,
as
so on
it is
earth,
in heaven, so on earth it is today. And it's like, don't worry about tomorrow. It's got enough worries of its own. Be focused on today.
My brother always says, he goes, you can tell whether you have a proud pastor or not based on as he's aging, if he starts preaching Revelation more and more because his life is ending.
I'd never thought about that.
That's so good.
But there's a significant truth in there that as people become dissatisfied with what they see happening around them in their world and their culture, that longing for it'd be easier if God just came in and ended it,
wiped it out,
than to have to engage with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think we need to have a more missional mindset in our culture.
Yeah.
I think we've grown up, and I'm talking about my generation and older a little bit, but we've grown up with this sense that we're a Christian nation and we go out and reach the world, and now the foundation of that seems really loose and shaky, right. And we can't really claim to be a Christian nation the way we maybe once could have, even if it was ever really true. But certainly there were stronger foundations
Yeah.
in some earlier parts of our country's history. But now it's certainly a very kind of diverse belief system in our
Right.
culture. And I think some people are just like, it'd be easier. That's intimidating to engage with. So it'd just be easier if God ended it. So I'd like to believe this is the end time so that I don't have to deal with,
Right.
like, I'm not responsible
Instead
for
of plucking the weeds, let's just burn the whole crop and start over.
But I think there's a difference in contentment
Yeah.
as far as when we're young, we don't have enough knowledge. So we're content in just whatever comes to school. That's great. We'll figure it out, whatever happening. And then we get into more of the, if you will, 30 through 50s, where it goes back to, oh, wait a minute, there's things that are not peaceful in my life and I need to figure that out. And then we kind of head into our aging years when we realize, wait a minute, the world really is not content right now. And it's painful. And I would rather be out of the world than in the world right now.
Right.
And I don't think that changes from generation to generation to generation.
yeah.
So, when you look 30 years from now, you guys may be where the boomers are going,
Yes.
wait a minute, this world sucks. I want out.
Yeah.
you know?
Revelation. Let's go. Yeah.
if we can stay in a more missional kind of mindset, like whatever I'm comfortable with isn't what's right. Like, I'm constantly trying to speak the gospel and just show the gospel into the culture, whatever the culture is.
Yeah.
I think maybe that would help it. So what do you guys see as the big opportunities? Like, what are the things that you see now in our culture? You're like, what, the church could step into this and make a big difference. What are the opportunities we have?
I can just speak for myself. It what was that? 4 years ago, I was 230 pounds and I was like, I need to get myself back in the gym, start working out, lose weight. And initially it was just because I felt miserable and I wanted to be healthier. And at that time, I was at church 6 days a week. I was always there serving, doing everything. And the more I got into the gym, the more I felt like God say to me, like, hey, like you've come out of the house. Good job. Like, you're actually shining your light now. And the further I got into it, as the years went on, I started to realize that a lot of us, because of the way the world is, hibernate in the church. And then what's weird, and I can speak from my own experience, when I did step out, people that used to hibernate with me didn't like that I wasn't hibernating anymore. And it almost nearly offended them. Like, are you a prodigal now because you're not serving 6 days a week? But little do they know, I'm having coffee meetings with people from the gym. I'm sharing the gospel on my social media. I'm talking to people. I'm praying with people. But I don't blast that all on my social media, so people don't know. They don't see that. But I think the church has an opportunity with, like, what is that scripture? Where darkness abounds, grace abounds all the more. Like, sure, the world is dark, but that you don't see light very well unless it's dark. That's the point, right? And so for us to hide away and shun the world instead of going out into it, it defeats the purpose.
Yeah, Jesus was beautifully talked about. You don't take a light and hide it under a basket.
And the church can easily become the basket.
Yeah.
And we forget to go out.
Safe retreat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a balance between the two, I think.
Do you think that is that a perspective of your generation, or do you think that comes from just you being on staff? I know for me, it's not so much, I don't know that I'm necessarily insulated, as I don't have the time.
Sure. Yeah. That's different.
And so then there's like, I have to do these purposeful things to get out.
Yeah.
Outside of the church. But I'm curious if you think the general person coming in on Sunday feels that same insulation.
I think what I'm saying is a lot of churches will preach the only way to serve God is to serve in church.
Okay.
And we remove the ability to serve God at the coffee shop, at the gym, at the grocery store. And we forget to preach that. And so people don't find purpose in their day-to-day lives. They only find it when they serve in church.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you?
Your purpose is to give to the church so that the church can do the missionary work for you.
But don't forget, like when you're in the grocery aisle or when you're, at the gas station, like don't forget those moments matter. That's your life. That is your life to God.
Right.
It's your seeds.
What kind of opportunities do you see out there, Sterling?
Well, I think, I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I'll give you a great story. When I was quite a bit younger, my grandfather and I decided to restore an old Mustang, 67. So we're in the yard one day working on the Mustang. We had torn the front end apart, had the engine out, and we're welding on it, doing all sorts of stuff. And these two Jehovah's Witnesses come driving up, get out of the car, and my grandfather, without blinking an eye, runs. I mean, I've never seen the man run before in my life, but runs towards these people like he's going to tackle them, shouting,
"Oh no.
You've changed the Bible. The Bible says in Genesis, and he starts quoting off scriptures, and these guys go white as sheets, that you believe that Jesus died on a stake. He died on a cross. There's power in the cross. And I mean, he's like flying these facts at these guys. And they're like, they're thumbing through their Bibles trying to figure out what to say to him. And, and he's just nailing them, man. And so these guys like basically get back in their car and drive off. And he turns around to me and he goes, Sterl, you have to hit them hard. If you don't hit them hard, they're not going to understand. They're wrong in their ways, and they're not going to change unless you push it at them. You got to push hard. And I was just like, what just happened?
Wow.
Oh, it threw me off. And I was just like, that was wild. What did I just witness? That was a Jehovah's Witness beating right now.
Oh my gosh.
Holy smokes. And I think in a funny way, like the church kind of expects you to like, oh, you see a Mormon, you should get in an argument with them. You see a gay person, you should tell them they're wrong. You see,
like instead of building the relationship first,
right.
showing them Christ,
showing them Christ, we should tell them what Christ thinks about them. And so like, yesterday, I'm part of a team that helps people who are struggling with their mortgage payments. And if they're facing foreclosure, we try to help them restructure their loan, or we see if we can purchase the house from them without getting the foreclosure on their record, so they don't have to deal with a foreclosure.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a cool way, and then in the process, we're able to then use that real estate and turn it into an asset. So we were knocking doors yesterday, and this guy on the team, I've only met him once briefly, but he was like, hey man, are you available to go driving with me and we'll go knock doors together? And I said, sure. So we get in the car, we're driving around and we're talking and whatnot. And he goes, yeah, I speak Spanish. I said, oh, cool, man. I don't speak Spanish at all. And he was like, where did you learn Spanish? And he said, oh, I did a missions trip in Spain for 2 years. And I was like, oh. And in the back of my mind, I went, I wonder if he's Mormon. He went on his missions trip. Okay. So then we're driving around and we happen to drive into the neighborhood where his church is, which is the Mormon temple.
Gotcha.
And he goes, that's my church right there. And I went, cool, man, good for you. And I went, yeah, I was a pastor for, quite a while. He goes, you were a pastor? No way. So we sat there and had this cordial conversation about Christianity. And then never one time did it enter my mind to say to him, you're wrong for believing in Mormon, in the Mormon faith, because it's wrong for these reasons, and it's my job as a Christian to tell you that you're out of bounds.
He got home though. I said, so I have a joke for you. And he said, yeah, what's that? I said, so a pastor's kid and a Mormon walk into a bar. Bada bing, bada boom. That was it. That was the whole joke.
So I say all that to say, like, I think one of the greatest opportunities is to equip our people to have love as their first tool. And facts to be the last tool. Yeah.
When I went to go do my first bodybuilding show at the time, I had somebody from the church say to me, how are people going to feel about you getting on the stage like that? And I got offended because it attacked many things internally. And my response to them was, I said, if I am the first Christian to step foot on a bodybuilding stage, then what are we doing? What, like, that is what I was trying to say kind of at the
Yeah.
beginning of the conversation. Why is it so important that I look good on paper but not actually go out and do anything important? You know?
Yeah, it's funny. While you were telling the story, I was thinking of the people in my life that I know that would be like that would have criticized your conversation with your Mormon friend because you didn't try to change them in that conversation, and if you prioritize the relationship, you'll have many opportunities to talk about faith and what's important.
Yeah.
If you go for the jugular at every opportunity,
Yeah.
you're gonna lose the opportunity to engage with that person.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. The only people I saw Jesus critical of, really like aggressively critical of, were judgmental religious people.
Yeah.
Everyone else he was super gracious with. He was quite critical. Like there was one little group of people that that he was ruthless with, but it was people who were those like judgmental religious people, and I'm like, that's a caution to me that we don't become those people.
Do you know that scripture, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that one drives me nuts because it's so used and abused. Because if you read the story right before it, Jesus is talking about the thief, and the thief is the Pharisee stealing the tithes from the people. And I find it so ironic because in our day and age, that is like, you hear that from so many pastors on like the thief's done, and they use it to talk about the devil. But ultimately, the story, the context behind it was not. I found that interesting.
Yeah. So the religious people.
Yeah. Stealing the joy from the heart of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's one of the things that blew me away at this conversation I had with this friend of mine who happened to be a Mormon was that after our first time hanging out, at the end of our conversation, we were talking and he goes, hey, I know that you're a contractor now and you don't have a W-2 income, but I have a W-2 income and so does my wife. And, we might be able to structure a deal where I pull out a loan so you guys could buy a house and then I'll just sell you the loan. And I kind of stopped for a second. I'm like, so here's this guy who's met me one time and he's willing to go put his financial status on the line for me. And yet the first thing in my mind, my Christian mind, was I should tell this guy how he's wrong. And
but I think you showed him Jesus through your kindness and
right. And I mean, and I never brought that up. We were just friends and we just talked. But I went, wow, like what opportunities would I have missed out on a great friendship?
Right.
It's not about money. It's about the friendship, because ultimately I don't think we actually need to do that, but it was just kind of him to even offer or to even come up with the concept. Right. And I thought, man, the place for us to have the conversation of, is the Mormon faith the right faith for you, bro? Is like, after we've been friends for 5 years and we're sitting around a dinner table and he's going through a struggle in his life. And I'm like, dude, can I introduce you to like the Holy Spirit and who Jesus really is in your life? Because I feel like you've been sold a counterfeit one. And I only tell you that out of love.
But he's got to know the love's there first. Yeah, what were you going to say, Scott?
Well, I just think that's the whole point of what resisting pretense is about.
Yeah.
Is that idea of we can get into conversations and we can disagree, but we can do it in a loving manner. We can do it in a way that says, I understand you don't agree with me. You understand I don't agree with you. That's okay. We can still be friends. We can still, and I was kind of struck because I did a premarital counseling, and one of the people was grew up in a Christian home in our church. The other one grew up in a Mormon home, and it was really interesting. As we got to the point of being just talking about unequal yoked, and my comment to them was, you guys got to figure this out. I said, this is your marriage. Nobody else is going to be engaged in it except for you two. But there are stark differences between what you believe. I will share a couple of them with you, but you guys need to figure it out.
Yeah.
Because you're the ones who are going to be, this will become an issue when you have kids.
Yeah. So, yeah.
You know, you may be fine while you're single, but once that first child comes, it will become an issue. And so you need to figure it out. And, you know, I think to myself, you know, I wonder if they walked away feeling judgmental about that conversation, and that wasn't intentional.
Yeah.
I have a tendency to be very forthright in what I say to people, trying not to be judgmental, but also saying, you need to know, here's the reality of what's coming if you don't, if you're not aware of it, might be a better way to put it.
I think the fine line is when whoever is giving out words, the church, sometimes we forget that we were dirty too once. And I think that is the difference. Like, if you remember that when you're dishing out advice and you're dishing out words and you're trying to tell people, then it goes a different way. But when you forget that you were dirty too once, it comes across completely different.
Yeah. So we always like to give our guests on the podcast kind of the final shot, you know, and in any part of this conversation, how we engage with our culture, things that either we need to own up to, or things, you know, things that we're excited about, opportunities we're excited about. But I just love to hear from each of you, like, because we're gonna wrap up here in a minute. What's the lasting impression you have from this conversation that you want to be kind of your last word on it?
I think I can only think about my favorite story in the Bible, and that's when Jesus raised the 12-year-old girl from the dead. He didn't just do his miracle, but after the fact, he said, now give her something to eat. Jesus always takes care of the physical, and he takes care of the people and their actual needs amidst doing his spiritual thing.
I love that. Yeah. So don't lose sight of that.
Yeah. I think when we go out into the world, we need to remember to give people something to eat.
I think for anybody who is willing to listen to this podcast, they're already in the right direction because they're willing to learn and they're willing to receive. And I think that's the first step is, can we get past ourselves for a few minutes to be willing to change? And to be willing to go. And I think that's the ultimate, like, battle between the boomers and then the Gen X and the, you know, the different age brackets, is the younger generation, of course, is always like, why are you so set in your ways? Right. And that's the big argument between everybody. And then the you know, I look down at the people younger than I, and I go, oh my gosh, what is going on?
And so it begins again.
They've lost their minds.
They never got a mind.
Right. Like, are you, like, I get amazed at sometimes when I see the younger generation and I'm like, man, you guys don't want to work hard. Like, I want to find somebody who wants to work hard. Like, I just wanted an opportunity when I was your age. And like, you guys have opportunity everywhere, but nobody takes it. And it frustrates me. Like, I'm like, oh, if I only had that opportunity, I would have jumped on it. And I had opportunities too, you know, I'm not saying I didn't have opportunities, but I think when you have that older generation that's like, well, this is how it's always been done, and this is how we're going to do it. I look at that and I say, okay, I need to be willing to change. I need to be willing to receive wisdom from the wise, the people who have lived and that they have experienced it, and they're looking at me going, you just don't even know what's coming, bro.
What you say makes me think of the phrase humble posture.
Yeah.
Like keep a humble posture.
Right. And if we can keep that humble posture in our, in our mindset as Christians, that we haven't figured it out. Right. And I heard one guy say one time, he's like, hey, if you were to spend your entire life dedicated to studying the Word of God, you would understand 1% of 1% of God.
Yep.
And then you have the boomer generation as a whole being like, we've got it. And then the Gen
Yeah.
X group comes along and says, we've got it. And then what's after that? The generation millennials,
You.
us are like, we've got it. And so you have like these people who have these mindsets on how they think they've figured God out because
Right.
they've read 5 stories in the Bible and correlated facts between them. And it's like, dude, we don't understand anything. And you know, there's a little part of the Bible where Jesus gets lost and they find him in the temple wowing the priests with his questions. The reason why he was wowing the priest with his questions was because in Jewish culture, when a child is born up until 5 years old, their father is supposed to teach them the book of Leviticus, and they would be tested at 5 years old to see if they had memorized the scriptures.
Mm.
And if they passed that test of memorization, then from there, from like 5 until 12, they would then have to learn the rest of the Torah, and they would be tested again, but it wouldn't be on do you know the material, because it was kind of cheap to know the Bible. It was cheap to know the word. It was like, yeah, everybody knows it in those days. So they don't really care about whether or not you knew what the facts were. They wanted to know, what were your questions about the facts? Because they believed, they have a belief that the conversation about God cannot end. You shouldn't be able to figure God out, because if you've figured it out, you've lost.
You've already got it wrong.
Like, you're wrong already. So that's why we see Jesus wowing the temple priests with his questions, because here he is continuing the conversation. But we should always have that in our hearts, that we continue the conversation and we don't just come to the place of completion.
We're all teaching each other all the time.
Yep. Well, guys, thank you so much. The time's flown by.
Yep.
And the conversation was great. We hope that this inspires some conversations with you at the gym or the grocery store or, you know, the neighborhood, wherever it is, and that our influence in the world extends far beyond the walls of the church. So I think that's it. That's a wrap.
Thank you.
That's a wrap.
Until next time.